The response was immediate. Brazilians from all around the country started to share posts with images of lab animals severely injured and started asking for a solution. Slowly, local national media began to cover that fight. A couple of celebrities, especially actress Luisa Mel, joined the activist cause. As the communication landscape got denser and the network population gained greater access to information about the Institute, Brazilians around the country decided it was time to gather in São Roque for another major national protest, this time for lab animals. Once they heard of the imminent protest, the Institute administrators decided they were going to remove the lab animals to another facility. Thursday night, before the protest that had been scheduled for Friday, the activists rushed to the Institute and chained themselves to the gates of the lab in order to impede the trucks that were already parked, ready to remove the animals. Immediately, the news of the upcoming removal of the animals and images of the girls chained to the gates hit social media. Protesters knew they could not wait until Friday. It is now 7 p.m. and Leandro Ferro, a young male well known for his animal rights activism, especially against rodeos, living in the city of Santos, also 2 hours from São Roque, receives a phone call from a friend asking him if he could drive to São Roque immediately to help with the cause. His friend tells him the activists in São Roque need some male presence. And his friend also says that he's heading in that direction and other people would be doing the same. The Brazilian military police is warned that the protesters are heading to São Roque. Now, the police have been massively criticized for their use of brutal force while dispersing the national protesters and are now more cautious of their future actions. The Institute is located in a country area whose car access is difficult. However, many people are riding and parking in the goods and walking to the Institute, meeting the chained girls. Rumors about the whereabouts of the animals begin to escalate. Some people start saying that the administrators might have been killing the animals. Panic, chaos. In his interview with me, Leandro Ferro, who is also vegan, emphatically stresses that the people who went to the Institute were not only vegans. Quote, there were vegans there too, but the majority of the people were dog lovers who were moved since beagles were the largest number of animals used in experimentation in the Institute. There were men, women, children, everyone, end quote. Although later media reported that the activists had planned to invade the Institute, Leandro says it's a lie. Nobody had planned to invade the lab, for they knew charges would be pressed. A group of people negotiates with the police to go in and check if animals are being killed. Police entered the Institute too, put everyone against the wall, and tried to negotiate. Meanwhile, other protesters enter the Institute from a back door and start rescuing the beagles and bringing them outside. It is now 2 a.m. in São Roque, and this unprecedented animal rescue in Brazilian history is inevitable. Everyone is carrying a beagle or two until every dog is taken out of that facility. It is estimated that more than 300 beagles were rescued. Okay, this is Leandro Ferro. The next day, Leandro says that this picture was the headline of all major news in the country, and media has now shifted its focus to the Royal Institute. Leandro says that also the following day, when he turned on his cell phone, he had more than 1,500 people trying to add him on Facebook. He had messages from people as far as Japan and Israel. The Municipal Council of São Roque held an emergency meeting with activists to discuss the fate of the animals rescued as well as the other animals, mice and rabbits, that were not rescued that day. Leandro was expecting retaliation, but says he was shocked and almost left He found this scene to be an epiphany as he watched the mayor, the prosecutor, and the judge apparently showing sincere concern, discussing the fate of the mice. Quote, "I'm used to being humiliated and mistreated by politicians when I address the rodeo issue. What was going on here?" End quote. Charges were pressed against some activists, but later dismissed. And Leandro says that despite the Institute's power and money and the science community that positioned themselves categorically against the closure of the Institute, he strongly believes that the Brazilian population supported the actions of the activists. He also stresses that, quote, social media is essential for outreach, end quote. Within a month of the invasion, the Royal Institute had its doors shut permanently. The state of São Paulo passed a new law prohibiting animal experimentation for cosmetics purposes. It is the first Brazilian state that has ever passed that law. Other states have since then started to start prohibiting animal experimentation for cosmetics too, as well. Even though Leandro became a national, international hero because of that picture, he credits the success of the Royal Institute protest and closure to the group of girls in São Paulo, to the Brazilian population, and especially to the power of social media. I will now make two brief comments regarding animal experimentation and the use of dogs in testing. And then I will also briefly address some connections between the fight for human rights and non-human rights in Brazil 2013. And finally, I'll make some remarks about the political power of social media. About 20 million animals are experimented on and killed annually, 3/4 for medical purposes and the rest to test for various products. An estimated 8 million are used in painful experiments. Reports show that at least 10% of these animals do not receive painkillers. Animal rights advocates are pressing government agencies to impose heavy restrictions on animal research. But this growing criticism of painful experimentation on animals is matched by a growing concern over the threat that restrictions on the use of animals would pose to scientific progress. Claire, Andrea, and Manuel Velasquez point out an inevitable truism. Whether such experiments should be allowed to continue has become now a matter of public debate. End quote. Although the public is led to believe that animal experimentation is a necessity in order to test medication and find important cures to diseases that affect humans, in this story that I'm telling you, Leandro tells me that after the rescue of the beagles, the Royal Institute lied, saying that they were about to find a cure for cancer. And without the animals, they had to stop their studies. In reality, it was found that most testing done in the Institute was carried out for cosmetic purpose. Although the scientific community argues in favor of animal experimentation, animal rights activists as well as scholars have articulated that it is not ethical to experiment on animals. Tom Regan explains that animals have, quote, inherent value as subjects of life and therefore cannot be regarded as means to an end, and amongst other rights have a right to be treated with respect, including the right not to be harmed. Second, I'll make a comment about the beagles. There is little doubt that the Royal Institute calls also gain popularity because people relate to dogs more than they relate to other lab animals or any other animal, so to speak. Erica Fudge, in her book Animal, asks if a pet is an animal and alleges that pets make up, quote, a different class of creature, end quote. Pets and dogs, especially, Fudge explains, quote, live with us but are not us. The pet provokes a fear about boundaries, neither fully animal, neither fully human. The boundary between subject and object, human and animal, is absent. End quote. In reality, for many people, pets are the closest relation they have with non-humans, and most people see pets as family. However, and as Erica Fudge points out, it is incorrect to take the pet as a simple representation of all animals. Without a doubt, the majority of people who join the activists against the Royal Institute venture their ways to protest and eventually participate in the unplanned rescue operation, they did so because of the beagles. Whether people would show compassion if the only animals being experimented on were mice and rabbits might be debatable. But studies show that most people seem not to favor animal experimentation regardless. What studies are also demonstrating is that digital tools must be playing an important role in creating awareness. For example, an article in the Science magazine dated February 16, 2014 reads that. I'm not going to read that. Carrie Freeman, in her article Fishing for Animal Rights in the Cold, reviews the works of Francione, Singer, Spiegel to explain that as a movement to end species discrimination of sentient beings, animal rights can be compared to human rights movements that strive to end the legally sanctioned discrimination, objectification, and exploitation of women and racial and ethnic minorities based on arbitrary and unjust hierarchies. Brazilian animal rights activists that fought against the Royal Institute are implicitly similar to Brazilian human rights activists that fought for social change in their willingness to take risks, challenging the status quo and sometimes breaking the law non-violently in order to save victims suffering injustice. Freeman explains that such patterns follow sociologists' advice that counter-hegemonic activists frame their unfamiliar ideas using historically familiar frames for increased cultural resonance. Also, Fernanda Medeiros, a Brazilian animal rights scholar, explains that we live in a catastrophic time, an ecological calamity, which in reality represents a crisis between humans and humanity itself. Now, my last comment is about the power of social media, if I have time. Yes. Awesome. Clay Shirky, in his article, The Political Power of Social Media, calls attention to the ability that non-disciplined and coordinated groups have through the use of social media to compensate for their disadvantages. Quote, larger, looser groups can now take on some kinds of coordinated action, such as protest movements and public media campaigns that were previously reserved for formal organizations, end quote. Shirky explains that such phenomena is called by the military as shared awareness, which is the ability of each member of a group to not only understand the situation at hand, but also understand that everyone else does too. Social media increase shared awareness by propagating messages through social networks, end quote. The 2013 national protests in Brazil and the invasion of the Royal Institute had massive social media engagement without historical precedent, also because there was not social media before. Now, social media was used mainly as a tool to coordinate those protests, rather than as a replacement for real-world action. As a result, all of those protests exposed participants to threats of violence, and in some cases, its actual use, especially by police. Shirky points out that the use of technology, especially cell phones, as a means to coordinate and document real-world action is so pervasive that it will probably be part of all future political movements. There's also an article by The Guardian dated June 17, 2013, right when the national protests were taking place. And I quote, people turn to social media to share what they saw on the streets and invite others to join in the protests. According to a well-known polling company, a surprising 72% of Brazilians online supported the demonstrations, and 10% claimed to have joined the protests in the streets, end quote. Likewise, and as Leandro stresses, social media played an important role in spreading knowledge and gathering people to join the protests against the Royal Institute. It is safe to say that during the year of 2013, social media in Brazil became a fact of life for social changes, involving and I quote, many actors, regular citizen activists, non-governmental organizations, and so forth, end quote. Also, protests for both human rights and non-human rights had positive outcomes in a short period of time if compared, for example, to 20 years of protests against the Brazilian military dictatorship when there was no internet. In sum, the Brazilian manifestations of 2013 helped citizens to know a new mechanism of interaction, leading to their awareness that citizenship can and should be taken beyond representation and having a direct voice in the matters of social change. Leandro believes, and I'm going to let you see this without.
I don't know if my computer's online. Yeah, we're at time as well.
Okay.
That's okay. I don't know if the computer's online either.
That's okay. I'll just finish my last paragraph. Leandro believes that in 2013, the case of the Royal Institute was the most important fight for animal rights, not only in Brazil but in the world. He thinks that the invasion and rescue of the lab animals of the Royal Institute facilitated for some Brazilians a broader understanding of mechanisms of power, like the ability that some institutions funded with tax money have to treat animals as they wish, and that such attitude is to a certain extent equivalent to the treatment humans receive in the social sphere. The Royal Institute case helped Brazilians to reflect on the conditions of lab animals as they were also critically assessing their own social oppressions. As a person who loves animals, an animal rights activist, I can only hope that Leandro is right, that the 2013 protests helped my fellow Brazilians understand that oppression cannot be fully understood within the confines of the human societies. And like Leandro, I want to believe that in 2013, Brazil fought for the rights of humans and non-humans, perhaps anticipating the direct link between human and animal liberation, whose connections activists often have to explain. As a researcher, I aspire to gain a more in-depth understanding of what really happened during the invasion of the Royal Institute, because it was completely unusual, and it happened so suddenly that the social and legal effects of it have not yet been fully understood, neither addressed by the academia. And finally, I want to establish a transnational dialogue between South and North and the rest of the world. Thank you very much.
Let's see if it's okay.
Yeah.
Does anyone know how to connect?
Yeah,
you
go ahead.
I don't see it. The second. But when I read that, so just make sure that it's safe. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. Maybe at the end you can go without the words.
I'm just going to introduce our next speaker as the technology gets worked out. Ping-Su Lee is originally from Taiwan. About 5 years ago, she came here to attend the School of Social Work at Colorado State University and received her PhD in 2015. Her dissertation topic is related to equine-assisted psychotherapy and her specialty and lifelong interest in human and animal interaction. In the class of social welfare policies, She started to use these tools and to conduct more interdisciplinary research to enhance the well-being of human animals and non-human animals.
This is my topic, and you can see the topic is ethical and cultural issue in animal welfare in Taiwan and in the United States. And I found when I talk about the animal welfare issue, with my discuss the issue in the United States with my professor, and he told me in the United States it's very, very, very diverse. So it's hard to say this day this way and the last day this way. So in this presentation, I will focus on much more in Taiwan. I hope it's okay for you. Yeah. Okay. And this is Taiwan. It's here, right beside China. And if we have time, I will show you the documentary. It's called 12 Nights. This is a very, very good documentary. It's I think it was released in 2013. Yeah, and from this documentary, you will see the stray dog. They went to the shelter from the first day to the last day. They can be adopted, but a lot of them just now euthanized. So yeah, it's a very good documentary. And here, because my background is social work, so today's presentation I will lead this presentation from a social work perspective. Long time ago, when I was 18, I just graduated from high school. And in Taiwan, the system, the educational system is very, it's a little bit different from here. Before I go to the college, I needed to choose my major. And I discussed my career goal with my family. And I'm the first generation to go to the college. So I told my family, I said, I want to work with stray dogs. And my sister, she told me, oh, then you need to major in social work. So the first day when I went to the class, it's called Introduction to Social Work. Not a big class because it's a required class. Then I read the syllabus and I didn't see anything related to animal. So after the class, then I asked the TA in the class, I said, is there anything related to animal issue? And she told me only when animal issue influence people's life. Otherwise, we don't talk about animal issue in social work. Yeah. But then it's very interesting because these years I found that some articles and some books I found here, like 2014, this is a pretty new book. Yeah. And then the other one in 2011. Yeah, they all talk about animal issue. Yeah. And human and animal, they are interconnected. Yeah. For example, if social worker, they want to provide service to homeless people, they need to consider their animal because they treat their animal like family members. It's very, very important. Yeah. So then there's more literature they discuss domestic violence related to animal abuse. So they found a lot of women, they don't want to go to a shelter because They don't want to leave their animals at home. Yeah, and they are afraid probably the abuser will do something bad to their animals. Yeah, so it's very important for the social work to incorporate animal into their service. And the other, there are some article they found there are more social worker. They try to, when they do assessment, they try to investigate, is there any animal abuse issue in this family, in family, because they can be the signal related to child abuse. Yeah. Yeah. So in social work, we learn some social welfare policy analysis model. So in here, I will talk about cargo and strawberries. I don't know how to pronounce, I'm sorry. Yeah, social welfare policy. And I found when I use the social welfare policy into the animal welfare policy, there are some very interesting questions they are raised. For example, you can see the question like how many people are affected by the policy. You can see they use the term people. It's very, very human centered approach. Yeah. Yeah, and you can see will the goal affect the quality of life of the target population? Yeah, and how did you identify the population? So there are some very interesting questions here. So when I do some research in AWA in the United States and APA in Taiwan, you can see their statement. For example, in the AWA in the United States, they want to protect animal during the process of transportation and research. And long time ago, a lot of owners, they say their animal was stolen. Yeah. And in Taiwan, you can see the statement said to respect the lives of animals and protect them. But when I do more research, I found it's actually from very, very human-centered perspective. For example, here, why they try to pass the APA in Taiwan, because some children they were attacked by stray dog. Yeah, so they don't feel safe to have too many stray dogs in the streets. And then the next one is a lot of meat sellers they slaughter the animal as traditional market. Yeah. So there are some health issue for people. Yeah. Because in Taiwan, the temperature, especially in the summer, is pretty high. Yeah. So it's not safe to buy the meat from the traditional markets like this. Yeah. And from the religion perspective, in Taiwan, a lot of people, they are Buddhists and they are Taoists, and they believe in karma. Yeah. So what they do is they buy a lot of animals from the animal shop or in the traditional market, like fish or birds. Then they release these animals. Yeah. Because they believe they can accumulate their good karma. Yeah. And actually, it's become a debate between the ecologists and the religious leaders. Yeah. Yeah, because from the ecological perspective, it's not good for the environment. When you release the domestic animal into nature, sometimes they don't know how to survive. Yeah. And if you are interested, you can go into this clip. Yeah, to show religion they release animals. Yeah. And here I try to find some numbers, yeah, in United States and in Taiwan. And you can see from the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty of Animals in 2011. It said they estimate 5 to 7 million companion animals that enter the shelter, and 60% of dogs and 70% of cats they were euthanized. And you can see the other side is a number from Taiwan. Yeah, that high percentage they are euthanized. Yeah, now you can see the policy here in Taiwan. They say you should not abandon your animal. If you want to abandon your animal, you might consider to bring them into the shelter. But because the rate, I mean, there's a high percentage of the animal that are euthanized. So a lot of people in Taiwan, they choose not to send their animal into the shelters because they know if no one adopts animal, they will die. Yeah, yeah. So, and the other issue is they think it's a bad karma. Yeah. And this is a process. From they live in the street, then they go to a shelter, then they stay 12 nights. That's their policy. Yeah, because usually it's too crowded if you let them stay longer. So it's 12 nights. Then either they are euthanized or they are adopted. Yeah. So it's very interesting. When I try to look at the dictionary, I found the definition of the shelter. It's about its place. And we build that place to give the protection. So the animal they can avoid from the rain, wind, and attack. But if we have time, we can watch the documentary. Actually, it shows when animals they went to the shelter, they got the infection, and emotionally they are feel very, very stressful. Yeah, so it's not safe environment for the animal. And in the film, you can see even the little puppy, they stay in the same place, so they don't separate the little puppy with the adult one. Yeah. So this is a very interesting speech from Cat Talk. I'm not sure if you listen to this before or not. Yeah, I encourage you to listen to this one. Yeah, because sometimes from human's perspective, we think we are doing something good for the animal, but probably they don't think that way. So for example, we think we provide a shelter for the animal. Like I said, I provided you a shelter, but from their perspective, they think you send me to a concentration camp. Yeah. So here I will talk about two concepts. Shallow ecology and deeper ecology. It's, these two concepts from this philosopher. Yeah, it's, the shallow ecology means sometimes we human beings, we are concerned with ecological issues because these issues impact our own self. Yeah. And deeper ecology means we believe human and nature are interconnected. So it's more from ecocentric perspective. And when I read AWA and the APA, I found a lot of the statement in the policy. It's very much like a shallow ecological perspective. Yeah. And I think it's a strategy. I don't consider it's wrong. It's just a strategy. Yeah, to help people. Okay. To aware of animal issue. Okay. So I will. This is the last slide. Yeah. I have two questions. Yeah. Do the APA and the AWA and the APA contribute to greater social justice? I will say yes or no. Yeah. When I say yes, I know that I think for a lot of research animals, they are treated much better than several years ago. Yeah. But for when you watch the documentary, you can see still a lot of animals, they are suffering in the shelter. So so I think it's still a question for myself. Yeah. And the second one, do the AWA and the APA contribute to a better quality of life for the target population? If the target population is human, I will say yes, because we control the number of the animal in the street, so we have a better environment to live. But for the animal, yeah, I would say no. Yeah. Yeah, and it's very interesting for AWA and the APA, they don't mention how to educate public. Yeah, it's very important. From the literature, they all found some country they found education is very important before people they decided to invite the animal companion into their life. But yeah, I can see any policy related to education. Okay, so how many minutes we have?
3 more minutes.
Okay. I will show you the documentary, okay? Did you have it? Oh, and this, I think,
Sometimes if you get control, oh, it's a Mac, never mind, it was not sure. You go over it, you can control K. I'm hitting control over it, now. Control K.
It has to be full screen, so.
Yeah, it has to be full screen.
Yeah.
I'm not a Mac
Here.
person, this isn't my computer. I can't see.
and
And you have to plug the volume.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because we have to.
So anyway, it's free on YouTube and have English subtitles. So yeah, you can go to YouTube anytime. And they do this on purpose because they donate all the money from the ticket. I mean, they sell a ticket and encourage people to go to the movie theater. And then they donate 100% of the money to the shelter. And then they put all the film into the YouTube, so people can watch the film for free. Yeah. Yeah. So if you are interested, you can go to watch.
Okay, Carol Glasser. Carol L. Glasser works professionally, academically, and at the grassroots for the liberation of human and non-human animals. Since 2009, she has focused on ending animal experimentation and is a co-founder of an organization with an anti-vivisection group, Progress for Science, www.progressforscience.com. Dr. Glasser's academic work addresses social movements and the intersections of non-human and human-animal exploitation. In her scholarship, she advocates for scholars to use more accessible and publicly oriented research models and publication methods. She is currently an assistant professor of sociology at the University of Minnesota.
I'm going to hand something out. I'm not going to talk about it for a minute. A lot of you won't care. It's a logistic regression model. But for those of you who are really into math, you might. I'm just going to kind of blow over it in the... Okay. Now I'm just going to get started. Okay. So this work is not with me alone. It's with my co-authors, Erin O'Sullivan and Harold Herzog, but I'm the only one here presenting it. So my talk today is titled Gruesome Images as a Social Movement Tactic, and I'm going to look at the effect of using graphic images and anti-vivisection outreach materials. The belief in the visual as an effective way to encourage specific attitudes or behavior is key to a lot of social movement tactics and campaigns. There seems to be, and I apologize, I'm going to use the word see, I'm going to talk about vision and visual a lot, and I know that this can be ableist, but it's kind of implicit in using visual images in campaign materials, so I apologize in advance for using that kind of language. Let me say that up front. There seems to be an underlying belief among some activist campaigns that a lack of knowledge and understanding is the reason why people aren't on board with their campaign. So that literally opening one's eyes and allowing someone to see will create the needed change. One type of image often used in these campaigns is the graphic or the gruesome image. And don't worry about those yet, guys. They won't make sense for a while. But, though these images are widely used in campaign and outreach materials, their impact is not well understood. The belief that simply seeing will be enough to generate change is a belief that motivates visuals in a number of social movement campaigns, particularly altruistic campaigns. And when I use the word altruistic campaign, I mean campaigns that are encouraging attitude or behavioral change for someone else. So movements like the pro-life movement, the animal rights movement, the environmental movement. And another note about language, I always just try to use the language of the movement I'm talking about, whatever language they would choose, so that whatever audience I'm talking to can access what I'm saying, okay? Do we all know what I mean by altruistic campaigns? So campaigns that are motivating change on behalf of someone else. So these images are used a lot in these movements, and these images are controversial, and so they're worth our understanding. Inter-movement schisms occur over the use of these images, and media often reacts to these images in very extreme ways, either extremely positively or extremely negatively. And social movement actors often react with an assumption that media will react to these images. The tactic is so controversial that it's actually legally been challenged, the ability to use such images. For example, one case in Colorado for the pro-life movement used images of aborted fetuses, and the Colorado courts decided that that was not covered under free speech, and that because children might see the image, that it was illegal to use such images. So this issue is actually really important. We're debating it in our movements, there's legal issues happening, we all have opinions over it, and now it's time that we try to understand the impact that they're having rather than just debate about it. So despite this controversy, there really is very little systematic research that's been conducted on the role of such images for animal rights or other altruistic social movement campaigns. This study is going to explicitly examine with an actual experiment the effect of such movement, such images when we're talking about anti-vivisection videos. So much of the intra-movement debate about the efficacy of such images deals with the question of whether these images will lead someone to connect deeply to an issue and to change their mind or their ethical orientation. This is what Jasper and Poulsen have called a moral shock. Or if it will have the opposite effect and be so gruesome as to turn people off and turn them away, and therefore get them not to engage with the topic or attitude change in question. This is what we might call a moral overload. So Jasper and Poulsen coined the term a moral shock. This is to describe those galvanizing moments when an event or an image becomes so jarring that it impacts a person's behavior or ideology. So a moral shock can occur suddenly, so you're just exposed to new information, or it can be that last straw. You've been exposed to information over and over, and the moral shock is that moment when it's just too much to take, and you completely change your attitude. You've seen, and you can no longer unsee. According to Jasper and Poulsen, the most effective moral shocks are moral shocks that actually become condensing symbols. They define condensing symbols as verbal or visual images that neatly capture, both cognitively and emotionally, a range of meanings and convey a frame, a master frame, or a theme. So in other words, a condensing symbol neatly packages a social movement's message and also motivates action based on that message. The animal rights movement uses graphic images with the intent of creating such condensing symbols. They mean to convey a message that animal cruelty is wrong, animal cruelty is unnecessary, and they hope to do this with one image. So a fox skinned alive or skinned at all for his fur, a monkey with devices soldered into her skull. The hope is that these images will generate a moral shock that is jarring enough to create a strong emotional reaction, such as empathy, outrage, and pity, and that emotional reaction will ultimately lead to attitude change or behavioral change. Sorry, I need some water. So many in the animal rights movement may believe that seeing suffering will lead to attitude and behavior change because this is the direction that led themselves into activism. So Jasper and Poulsen, who I noted earlier, they found that anti-nuclear activists were most likely recruited into activism through existing social networks. On the other hand, animal rights activists were encouraged into activism through moral shocks, regardless of whether or not they knew anyone else involved in the animal rights movement. This idea that seeing suffering will create an activist has been well supported by research. Research on animal rights activists, pro-life activists, and vegans have all found that seeing suffering has been integral to make this movement. But what motivates an activist may not be the same thing that motivates the average bystander or the average person for whom we're trying to convince of an attitude change. So for example, one study by Navi, who we'll talk about later, found that anti-vivisection videos as I'm going to use in this study, elicit feelings of disgust. Harold Herzog, a co-author on this study, found that people who rate higher on scores of empathy towards animals actually have stronger reactions towards disgust. So people who are more sensitive to disgust also are people who are more sensitive to animal suffering and have more animal empathy, and these might be people who are more likely to become activists. However, we don't know if the average bystander is also motivated by these images. The risk becomes whether showing such images can be just too much and cause a person to turn away. So Halfman and Young found that some, I'm behind in my slides. Halfman and Young found that some anti-slavery pamphlets with grotesque images and descriptions, not images, it was abolition, slavery time, so with grotesque descriptions of slave treatment were polarizing. So people who were already more inclined to agree with the anti-slavery notion found these grotesque descriptions of what was actually happening quite compelling. However, people who were more inclined to disagree found them very hyperbolic and very easy to turn away. So these grotesque descriptions actually became polarizing. Stanley Cohen, in studying how it is that people tolerate silently and watch as atrocities among humans like genocides and Holocaust occurs, find that people have a strong ability to engage in cognitive dissonance, or what he calls implicit denial. So he defines this as justifications, rationalizations, evasions that we use to deal with our awareness of so many images of unmitigated suffering. So essentially, people are able to cognitively shut down and turn away from suffering if they see too much of it. This tendency toward denial can result in bystanders interpreting gruesome imagery as hyperbolic, a unique example rather than a norm, or as being so normal that it should be accepted because it's just a part of culture. And this all prompts desensitization to this suffering. Finally, these images might actually offend and create backlash against the movement or a movement's ideology. So Mika was studying animal rights advertisements, specifically PETA advertisements, and she unexpectedly found that a gruesome image that was pro-vegetarian actually generated a lot of anger towards the animal rights movement. So there's also the idea that there might be a limit to the amount of gruesomeness a person can handle. So maybe both sides, maybe all of this research is correct, right? So maybe gruesome imagery can be motivating to a certain degree, but then there's a breaking point, at which point gruesome imagery is just too much. So that's what I'm gonna test with this study. So there's not really much empirical research to go on. So I've been diving into some other fields. What kind of empirical research do we have? There is some pretty good research on fear appeals for one's own health. So that's different than an altruistic social movement. We're trying to use gruesome images to change someone's mind about someone else. But there have been studies on what happens if you show people images of a charred lung. Well, are they more or less likely to quit smoking? Generally, that body of research finds that gruesome imagery helps the cause. When we look at donor behavior, we find this middle ground. So if you show an image of a starving child and his mother, people are likely to donate money. If you show an image of a starving village, it's just too much suffering, people cognitively shut off, less likely to donate money. So studies of donor behavior find graphic images okay, but only to a certain degree. Then there have been a few empirical studies in the animal rights world. I just mentioned Mika's study that found that there was some sort of backlash created. But what's interesting about this study is she was looking at a pro-vegetarian campaign. In a pro-vegetarian campaign, the viewer is actually being implicated. If we think about anti-vivisection, most viewers of these ads against animal testing aren't actually engaging in animal testing. So we might get a different reaction. Navi did a study that was looking at vivisection videos, and that's why we went with vivisection to sort of build off this small body of research. But she was looking at using gruesome images for the pro-research argument. So when gruesome images of animals in labs are used to support research, we find less support for research. So the question becomes, is it that there was any gruesome images at all? Do gruesome images turn people off from any message? Or does it matter what the message is as to whether or not gruesome images are effective? So if we use gruesome images for the anti-vivisection side, will we get a different response and a different answer? Monetero et al. Had a very interesting study. It is unpublished, but they had a lamb on a slaughterhouse floor, or a pig actually, and different levels of blood and guts and abuse to this pig. and they found no effect in terms of animal attitudes after people viewed different advertisements with different levels of gruesomeness. So this brings us to my study with Erin and Hal, and we decided to just run a straight experiment. So we worked with a professional video production company, we worked with an anti-vivisection group, and you're going to hear from someone that does anti-vivisection work with PETA next. They worked with me too, so we created a script that was very similar to what animal rights groups are currently putting in their public service announcements. And so we used only still images and slideshows. So we were controlling for pretty much everything but the pictures of the animals. There was a control group that saw no video image. There was a group that saw only pleasant images of animals interacting with people or in the wild. There was one group that saw only animals being experimented on, and there was one group that saw sort of a mix of both of these things. The video talked about how animals choose to live, and then animals' experiences in a laboratory. And it went through the species of mice, rabbits, cats, dogs, and monkeys. We were very careful to get a nationally representative sample because we know that college students act very differently in their attitudes towards animals than others. So we had a nationally representative sample, and then once we removed people who did not finish the video, interestingly, there was no significant difference between who was going to finish watching the video. So we thought maybe people who saw this graphic image would turn it off. There was no significant difference though. But we did remove anyone who watched less than 90% of the video, and we were left with a sample of 321 people, and spread across these 4 different groups. We then took a survey with an animal attitude scale. Pieces of this were developed from Hal Herzog, who's also on this animal attitude scale, widely used in the psych field. And then we actually tested social movement behavior. We won't get to talk about that today, but we went to see if after doing this, people went ahead and signed a pledge to only buy cruelty-free product, or if they wanted to access pro-research information afterward. And we're just going to focus on the answer to one question today. And today I'm going to use, our analytic approach was a statistical approach of logistic regression, which you don't have to know about. I'll explain the results to you. So this is the way we asked a lot of questions. We were going a lot of places with this research, but today we're just going to talk about the answer to this question. This is a question from the animal attitude scale, so we kept it the same so we could compare it to other research. Respondents were asked if they agree or disagree with the statement, "I do not think there's anything wrong with using animals in medical research." Why do we choose this? Because this is where there's the most support for animal research, is in the field of medical research. So medical vivisection is what we're calling it. So the most support is for medical vivisection of any type of animal research, so this is our litmus test. Does anyone have questions so far? Okay. Now, I gave you guys a full model, a logistic regression. It means nothing to most of you, but just so that you have it in case it's something you're interested in or you want to yell at me for my methods later. I just took a snippet just to show you kind of how to read it. Now, the effect sizes won't make sense to you, really, unless you're great at statistics. But basically, if this number over here is positive, or this number over here is greater than 1, that means there's more support for medical vivisection. If this number is negative, or this number is less than 1, it means there's less support for medical research. Now, essentially, it's actually not that meaningful, but just so that you understand how to read it, this is basically saying that there's a 5-point scale for how much you agree with medical vivisection. Men are 3 times more likely to go up 1 point on that scale compared to women if we control for everything else in our model. And you can see all the different variables we control for. Not interesting to most of you, but you have it if you want it. So we're going to move on. Here's a summary of our findings, and we're only going to talk about some of them today. But basically, people were more likely to select medical vivisection, basically, and this is controlling across any video you watched. So just demographically, we're not considering the video condition, people are more likely to support medical vivisection if they did not see a video, so seeing any video reduced your support for animal research. If you have at least a high school education, so as education goes up, support for animal research goes up as well. Men are more supportive of medical vivisection. Blacks and Asians are more supportive than whites, though whites are more supportive than Hispanics, regardless of gender. And never having had a companion animal compared to if you had one as a child section. I know this is unprofessional, but I'm super hot, so I'm just gonna just disrobe right now. Okay. And people with children are more likely to support medical vivisection. And we're going to analyze all this later and have cool stuff to say about it. But today I just want to focus on what happens with this video. So, this is the control, pleasant, mixed graphic. How much time do I have? I have 5 minutes. So if you strongly disagree, this means you're less likely. These two bars basically mean you're less likely to support medical research. Now, or medical vivisection. Now it looks like the more graphic images you get, the less support you have for medical vivisection, right? Which would lead us to the conclusion that you should show as many graphic images as possible. However, has anyone heard of statistical significance? We're familiar with that? Some of us? The differences between these videos are not statistically significant. So, but what is statistically significant? The control group versus any other group is. So, it looks like the more gruesome images, the less support you have for animal research, but we would need a much bigger sample to know if this trend actually plays out statistically. But what we do know, without a doubt, is that seeing any video compared to the control condition of not seeing a video makes you much less likely to support medical vivisection. So there's a lot of debate going on about how much gruesomeness we should see in our campaign materials, but that's not actually what's important. What seems to be important is just getting the material out there in the world and educating people, right? So the amount of gruesomeness we're finding is not statistically significant. It doesn't matter. But what does matter is if you saw any video at all. I know people are really interested in gender, so I just wanted to show you one of the other effects, even though we don't have much time today, of the differences between men and women. So it appears that we're digging into this more with more data and other questions that we have. Mind you, we haven't published this yet, so if you have any feedback, I want it so we can work it into the paper. But the control group, we see that men and women are pretty much opposite, right? Women start naturally with an orientation where they're more likely not to support it. Men are more likely to support it naturally. And we see the same effects on having this graphic video. You see the video, you reduce your support for animal research, whether you're a male or a female, but this makes a huge difference in men. So if you compare men in the control group versus having seen the graphic video, you see they essentially flip. So this also suggests the effect of this graphic imagery might really vary by gender. And we need to do a lot more digging into this finding. So moving forward, we want to look more at these demographic effects on the outcome. We want to know, is it visual images or any images? So right now what we're finding is getting the information makes a huge difference. The way those pictures look maybe doesn't matter so much. Now we're interested in, does it matter if you see it, if you read it, or if you hear it? So that would be a direction for future research we're interested in. We also want to get bigger samples and look at different movements to further interrogate if what we're finding where the amount of graphic images doesn't matter so much. We want to make sure that that's a solid finding in our future research. And we also have a lot of other really cool questions. So we have questions about species of animal or the type of research. So we're wondering if these images if they don't completely change your attitude towards animal testing, do they slide you up or down on the scale of how much animal experimentation you're willing to accept? If the species matters or if the type of research matters. So we have a lot still to investigate with this study. Any feedback you have is really great. And that is all I have for you today. Are you ready?
Mitch, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, and then you have 20 minutes, and I'll just again hold up a sign when there's 5 minutes left. So I'm going to turn you so you can see the crowd. Everyone wave to Mitch. Okay. Okay.
Can you lower the computer?
What's that?
Can you lower the camera?
You tilt the screen.
There we go.
Is
There.
that good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mitch Goldman is a research associate in the Laboratory Investigations Department at People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, also known as PETA, if you've never heard of them. He is a 2003 graduate of the Gender Studies and Feminist Research graduate program at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario. Okay, you have it, Mitch.
So, I hope folks can hear me well. I just wanted to thank the organizers for the stipend. I want to call my last Goldsmith, not Goldsmith. And I'm presenting this talk on myself, even though I joke that these aren't necessarily the opinions of PETA, that I'll be, it's called Torture, Species Barrier,
Hey, Mitch. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. You're kind of breaking up a little. Can I just try to call you back and see if we get a better connection?
Sure.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, because that's on a different computer. The video.
Kim.
Okay, we can try again, Mitch.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, so my paper is called Torture Across the Species Barrier, how the CIA's torture program relied on experiments on animals. In December, the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee released the findings of their investigation into the Bush administration's CIA torture program, reviewing millions of previously classified CIA documents. The Senate found the CIA was managing a ring of international black sites where suspects must be involved in acts of terrorism, oftentimes on little or no evidence, were kidnapped to these sites to be interrogated and tortured. An article shortly after the release of the report was one of the first interventions into the ensuing public debate about torture to link these programs to experiments on animals. Times reporter Vincent Carey wrote that Martin Spivey, a University of Pennsylvania experimenter, 1960s and 70s experiments with dogs and other animals, which sought to articulate a novel phenomenon described as human helplessness, formed the basis of the CIA's understanding and implementation of its torture program on humans. In this paper, I aim to better understand Weidman's decades-old experiments on animals and the CIA's contemporary application of these experiments through their torture program. The paper will follow 3 parts. First, an intersectional analysis into the ways in which torture and violence against animals and experimentation theoretically and tangibly underpin experiments and violence against humans, rather than acting as an impediment or alternative to experiments on this section of experiments on animals to support and encourage abusive and invasive relationships and experiments on humans. Secondly, I'll provide a critical illustration of Weidman's learned helplessness experiments on dogs and other animals. Finally, the ways in which Weidman's helplessness experiments were operationalized in the CIA's torture program and Weidman's apparent involvement in the promotion of torture abroad. Feminist theorist Dr. Hardy said early promotion of scientific methods coupled in fashion after misogynist deception and treatment of women, including metaphors of rape and torture, and that such theorists that sought his anti-scientific method likewise sought his anti-type of masculine domination over nature and women. Similarly, Carol Adams that vivisection reifies relationship between experimenter and animal as one as subject-object, and this relationship can be understood as an extension of patriarchal culture infused with formative and dominant masculine identifiers like tough, rigorous, rational, personal, sensitive, and unemotional. In a post-9/11 era obsessed with Arabs and Muslim persons, cultures, and societies are not only fetishized, but are often characterized, retrograde, and under the Western gaze, suffused with an intense fascination and speculation about gender and sexual politics. In her past book, Terrorist Villages, Homo Nationals in Queer Times, Desirvoir tracks this shift in Western conceptualization of Arab and Muslim bodies as an animalization, but also the projections of these bodies as very and sexually perverse. As Western adheres to a practice of heteronormativity, or what to call homonationalism, became further associated into mainstream capitalist cultural mores. AIDS faded from the imagination and the long-standing association of disease and the Western body's outlook projected onto male Arab Muslim bodies of the global South. This animalization of Arabs and Muslims, whose societies are often understood by the West and our policymakers and governmental institutions as to varying degrees uncivilized and animal-like, keep in mind it's more clear to see how the West is such bodies, justify such bodies as acting as stand-ins to the bodies of animals in torture and exploitation. The West nation with Arab and sexuality, there's this animalized narrative, but it is also born out of American technique, which involves sexual assault, sodomy, or actual humiliation. Karen Diggs understands the process of deception, process of transference, whereby animals substituted for humans, end quote, insofar as to disturb, quote, for people as.
Hey Mitch, I'm sorry, we're having problems hearing you. I don't know. I don't know how to make it any smaller than
Can you
this.
get that McAfee thing away?
It won't click off, I tried.
Can we just do audio?
Turn off the video. Let me try. I don't know if that's gonna. I think that's
You turn off our video.
oh, turn that.
No, not there. Like, so
Well,
that
I
it's,
don't know.
we're not streaming video.
Did I continue?
No, hold on. I don't know what you just pushed.
You probably have to call him again, turn off. I mean, end the connection and the connection.
We're gonna call you back, Mitch.
Okay,
Can you actually call us this time?
sure.
We're just doing the audio. Never mind. I thought I was just doing something. Okay, I guess we'll try again.
Okay, can you hear me better now?
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Okay, was any of the stuff I had previously covered audible or not really?
Yeah, it was just challenging.
Okay, so I just briefly covered early post or pre 9/11 concepts of vivisection and through a feminist lens. And so I'll just briefly say that Karen Davis sees the process of vivisection as a process of transference of human issues, human conditions, human specific information onto animals. And that the animal in experimentation is involuntarily made to appear as an aspect of the vivisector's identity. So I'll continue that defending the torture program, or what they call enhanced interrogation. The Bush administration claimed that such techniques were necessary to elicit information, and likewise, when asked to defend vivisection, or what they call research, experimenters also claim that such techniques are necessary to elicit information. So in both instances, the vivisector torturers assume that their victims have information, but these victims are just unwilling to give it up. Both torture and vivisection seek to force open bodies and expose secrets and knowledges that might be beyond one's grasp. And then, so this rings a similar tone towards Francis Bacon's early writings on scientific method, the promotion of the scientific method that was suffused with rape and torture metaphors, and metaphors to religious inquisitions. And so this sort of underscores a relationship that in science the truth justifies the means. And Susan Sontag's illness as a metaphor, she writes let me just jump back. So in the mind of the torturer, the information that is sought to be borne out through vivisection and torture is desperately needed in the case of the torturer to halt future terrorist attacks, to disrupt and disband terror cells, and to aid the war on terror. And for the vivisector, such information is needed on our war on cancer, our fight against AIDS. And an illness as a metaphor, Susan Sontag writes more about this and talks about the way in which disease is often cloaked in the rhetoric of war. And in a post-9/11 context, it's not uncommon for terrorism to similarly be described as an epidemic or a plague or a cancer, and that torture provides a step closer to a cure. And to provide this cure, torture is necessary. But as Elaine Scarry notes, it becomes impossible in a process of torture that actively destroys language. And Scarry argues that torture and pain are world-destroying, that one's reality and identity become totally sublimated to pain, and that pain becomes leads to an inability to express and to speak one's experiences. And is this inability to fully articulate pain that inhibits our understanding of the experience of torture, it inhibits our ability to empathize with the victim, and it inhibits our ability to ultimately recognize the urgency with which we should approach the abolition of structures of torture. Likewise, our inability to understand the language of animals, or in many instances to deny their speech, that they have speech and language, further inhibits our ability to empathize with their suffering or to acknowledge their pain, not to mention liken vivisection to other forms of oppression like torture. So at this point, I hope that it's become clear that there's something to this connection between torture and vivisection, that both be operationalized through the rhetoric of war and violence, that the victims of both are animalized, partly because of their inability to express or make intelligible their physical pain, and that both seek a knowledge through the evisceration of bodies. So transferring from this theoretical analysis to Martin Seligman's learned helplessness experiment, beginning in the early 1960s, Seligman began an examination into depression into humans by intentionally inducing the illness into animals. Of particular interest was a phenomenon he would later call learned helplessness, whereby an individual would learn or be taught to believe that their actions had no correlation to their current condition. So with Seligman, he introduced this idea to animals that their pain would persist or cease according to a process wholly unknowable or unchangeable by the animal. Describing this theory in 1972, he writes that, quote, when he shocks the dog to induce a feeling of learned helplessness, that, quote, the dog runs frantically about, defecating, urinating, and howling, end quote, and that if the dog is part of the naive group, which is not to be confused with learned helplessness, that eventually the dog will be allowed or made to cross the barrier or press a panel to stop the shocks and to accordingly stop the pain. And experimental, so this will become sort of a quicker process for the dog to avoid the pain. However, in the experimental group, the dog is not able to end the shocks, and they're forced to stay in this box with an electrified floor and learn that their behavior does not have the ability to alter their situation. So for this group, the experimental group, he writes that, quote, the dog's first reactions are much the same. However, in a dramatic contrast to the naive dog, a typical dog which has experienced uncontrollable shocks soon stops running and howling and sits and lies quietly whining until the shock terminates. The dog does not cross the barrier and escape from shock, rather it seems to give up and passively accept the shock. So that's the dog that has been induced with a feeling of learned helplessness. And in a 1967 study funded by the National Science Foundation, he extrapolates on an experiment with 30 dogs who were kept in individual cages and later split into this control and experimental group. Animals taught to avoid shock were regularly shocked, but eventually able to cross the barrier to avoid future shocks. Dogs in the experimental group were restrained with their feet forced onto the electrified flooring so that they could not avoid any shock. In the first day of the experiment, dogs received 64 6 milliamp shocks, ranging from 60 to 120 seconds, and similar sessions were conducted on the following 2 days, again with the experimental animals not able to escape, and eventually with the naive animals able to escape. The same article chronicles an additional experiment with 30 dogs, and in this experiment, the animals were exposed to shock sessions where if they were not able to escape, they would be exposed to upwards of 2,000 total seconds of inescapable shocks. He also explains that in his experiments, he would paralyze dogs so that they would be conscious but unable to avoid shock. And so when he writes that dogs would give up or just become passive, I want to say that this is what Elaine Scarry calls the destroying power of language. Because to say that someone gives up is sort of a benign description and a benign activity. People give up all the time, but in situations of torture, we're expressing something quite different. And so Elaine Scarry says that physical pain and torture obliterates the contents of our consciousness, that intense pain destroys the self and the world, and it destroys language, it destroys the content of one's language and one's ability to encapsulate through words the totality of their embodied experience. And this intention, this destructive intention, and to reassert the U.S. as dominant, that Jim Mitchell and Bruce Jessen identified as the two architects of the CIA's torture program, became more familiar with this theory of learned helplessness with Martin Seligman, and ultimately operationalized his experiments through the torture program. Both men were retired Air Force psychologists, and shortly after 9/11 created a company that received no big contract by the Bush administration to operationalize this torture program, both men receiving as much as $1,000 to $2,000 a day while under these contracts. Additionally, Seligman, who at the time was still teaching at the University of Pennsylvania, received a $31 million no bid contract in 2010. Both Jessen and Mitchell are suspected to have met with Slideman at least 3 times while setting up and shortly after establishing the torture program. Mitchell actually met with Slideman days before Mitchell would fly to Thailand to torture Abu Zabadiah, who, while kept in American custody, was waterboarded 84 times. Mitchell and Jessen believed that Luck's helplessness would make a captive person wholly dependent on the United States interrogators. The Senate Intelligence Committee expounds upon this, saying that both individuals were interested in this theory. They felt that learned helplessness would induce a sense of both debility, disorientation, and dread in their captors. According to journalist Jane Meyer, shortly before Mitchell was preparing to fly to Zabdiya, he remarked to a colleague that the torture process would be, quote, like an experiment where you apply electric shocks to a caged dog, and after a while he's so diminished he can't resist. To do this, Mitchell and Jessen and the CIA torture apparatus subject detainees to sensory deprivation, sleep deprivation, forced nudity, sexual humiliation, threats of rape and sodomy, include threats of rape by dogs, beating, waterboarding, prolonged restraint, bodily contortion, mock executions, electric shock, and other means. Speaking to the New Yorker in 2005 about his U.S. sanctioned Farrar, who is a Canadian citizen and was at the time a student at McGill University, described being threatened repeatedly by interrogators, his body and hands whipped with cables, and being kept in a grave-like room that he said not even an animal could withstand. So obviously there's a relationship between Slideman and 2 architects of the torture program. They've 3 times. Jessen and Mitchell expressed an interest that was later established in the Senate torture report. And I just want to say that although sleep influenced so heavily the torture program, that other experiments on animals that are ongoing, learned helplessness experiments are still ongoing with many species. Additionally, what's known as forced swim tests, Morris water maze or navigational tests, and tail suspension tests are all designed to induce similar feelings of acute depression in animals and mirror other torture techniques used by America and other countries. So in a way, vivisection has become operationalized through these programs of state terror, moving beyond the laboratory to black sites and other government detention centers like Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay. And it's because of this conflation of human and animal bodies, the manipulation and destruction of bodies and voices in vivisection and torture, that the idea of an intersectional approach to the abolition of these abuses becomes more intelligible. And as Marjorie Spiegel and others have noted, our lot is tied up with that of animals, and if we're to truly upend structures of oppression towards humans, our work likewise entails the upending of structures and domination across these barriers. Thank you.
If you would not mind sitting up here. Okay, so we're going to do the Q&A now, Mitch, so people just direct me. If you can't hear anyone, just say something. If you come closer, or I'll repeat any questions. So I'll let you know.
Yeah, I have a question for Carol. So I was just chatting with Suko after her presentation about using graphic, like her graphic images. Graphic in that sense, or you know what I mean, non-photographic, non-video images. And in her case, she's depicting torture, systemic torture and violence, and showing videos like Meet Your Meat. I was thinking, just drawing on experience, teaching an Introduction to Critical Animal Studies course at Queen's, and I last year when I taught it, I didn't show Meet Your Meet. And this year, because there's always that dilemma of this question that you pose, and also I don't want to traumatize students and so on, but then I showed it this year and I gave them the option to leave if they wanted, and sort of gave a preamble and a warning about it. So many students did. In fact, probably the majority left right after the first 30 seconds, and a few stuck around. I didn't do an analysis of who stuck around and why, and I actually wanted to discuss with them later what was going on for them. But to make a long story short, what I found was if I were to teach the course again, I wouldn't show that video. I personally, and this is not sociological research, so that's sort of where I'm going with this, is have you done any research on not just photographic versus, and video, like the negative versus the positive images, but images that are painted or sketched, like Sucos, because the reason I'm interested in that question, which may not be relevant given your findings, that just images in general make a difference, right? Fair enough. But I did find personally that in that classroom, the images of Sucos that I did use were more evocative because they didn't shut students down, didn't have that moral overload impact, and maybe I think it might have had the moral shock impact. And partially, what I would do next time also, I've asked Suco to provide anecdotes, like the kinds that she did in her slideshow, because I find this combination of sort of focusing on a specific experience of a specific individual animal and so on, it can sort of add to that image. So my question for you after all of that is, are you interested in that question? Have you done any research? Do you think there is a valid question there about?
I definitely think there is. So the number one thing that social movements lack is empirical research. We really love our opinions, and we really like to fight about our opinions, and we really like to grind down to the bone with our opinions. This is an untapped field of research. So this idea, so there is some stuff, I mean, all this stuff has to be studied, right? I'm not following my respondents over time. I'm not doing a pre and post test to see if one individual changes their mind. I'm creating an experiment to see if groups of similar people with statistical controls for who they are vary from other groups of similar people with statistical controls. So there is a question about what is the kind of imagery they see. There have been some studies with like the Meet Your Meet videos. If you do the pay-per-view and you're paid $1 and you watch the video with many more things than just images, right? We know that there's gruesome images and a story to be told. Those seem to be effective at getting people to say they want to be vegetarian. Do they actually become vegetarian? There's a good body of literature on photography and how that impacts and affects change, but a lot of that is visual analysis. So I think these are great places to go. There is some research on the anecdote. People love anecdotes, so there's a lot of donor behavior research that finds the anecdote is integral. So, but people also want the averages. So you need to paint a picture of an average, but show an image of an individual. You need to show that it's a big problem, but not with images. You need to provide us one story. So, in the Arms of the Angel video, I would love someone to do a story of that. Like, is that you get all these animals? So I think that's a great question. And I have the feeling in some fields, like visual representation and media studies, people are doing little pieces of it, but I think it all needs to be examined. And I also think that the classroom setting should be examined separately from the outreach setting, because there's different dynamics of power and different cognitive shifts that we're making in those two situations. So yes, I'm interested in it. No, I haven't researched it. I hope other people do. And if the money keeps rolling in, it's very hard to study these things because you don't want to college student samples, so you have to pay like thousands of dollars to recruit a well-drawn sample that's nationally representative, blah, blah, blah. Thank you. Thanks for teaching that class. That's awesome.
Okay, I have something to ask you, Carol, as well. This is piggybacking a bit on what you just said, and also what the comment that Sephora just made. One thing that comes to my mind that I think that one concern with showing these excessively gory images, like especially over and over and over again, is that I just worry that there's a real risk of of just objectifying the animals even further and objectifying their suffering, and that seems to me to be a way of kind of normalizing it and making people used to it. Like that's why I think it's important that you said that, for example, with Sue Coe's images, and also I think another good example would be Joanne MacArthur's photographs. There's a story behind it. I think if the images are presented with a story behind it that sort of humanizes, or rather animalizes the animals, and shows them as whole, like rather than just as objectified bodies being torn apart. I think that's a much better alternative, and I think that that's very, very meaningful and could be very, very powerful. It's just. Yeah, I suppose that's my comment. I was just. Yes. The other point I wanted to make was that, like, in some cases, people do become more empathetic to the animals upon watching the gory videos, but then also I find sometimes, and John touched on this this morning, it goes in the other direction where people, mostly men, they feel like they need to prove their masculinity or something. Like after watching these videos, they'll say things like, "Oh, but do you know how they taste?" Or they'll go in the opposite direction and they'll say, "Oh, I could eat a bacon sandwich after watching that." And I was just wondering.
So, I mean, I think you're making a good point that there are theoretical, ideological, moral, and ethical issues that we need to be discussing as theorists, as philosophers, and as social movement actors. And I think that that's true. We might find that they're very effective, but decide that there's reasons we don't want to use them because we're uncomfortable with taking someone's image and representation without their permission. And so that's completely valid. But we have a lot more of that happening in this movement and in academia than we have testing the actual efficacy of what activists are doing. And so I think it's important to be asking the questions you're asking and to be doing this sort of empirical work that myself and some others are doing. Because, for example, if something awful happens to me, my personal hope is that you would take that picture and create social change with it, right? But the person sitting next to me might find that really a violation of their body and their integrity. And so we need philosophers and we need people who are thinking from an ethical, ideological perspective about what right do we have to use someone else's image. And I know there's a lot of work being done on this in photography, particularly war photography, because there's so many iconic images in war photography that get used and they get held up and they get repeated and they symbolize big things. So I think that's a great question. I think what I'm interested in here is just what is the outcome of doing this.
Because I was thinking about that because I read an article on Salon recently, and I think it was Salon, and they were discussing footage of young black men being shot by the police, played over and over again, and they were saying that even though it could be seen as an expression of outrage, at the same time it objectifies these young black men, and their moment of death is shown over and over again without their permission, and it sort of normalizes the violence as an everyday occurrence for a mostly white audience. So
I think Rob had a question, just so we make sure.
Yeah, I wanted to, for Carol, sorry, everyone's, this is actually picking up on a point that Tori made. So I know that your list of possible reactions, moral shock and moral overload, those are not supposed to be exhaustive, but I was reminded by her comment that, in Tim Packerat's book, every 12 seconds, he talks about, the politics of sight, and he talks about viewing repugnant images. One of the dangers is, right, what he calls participation, right? So when I observe the video, and this is like what you're saying is, I could be morally outraged, or I could be overloaded, or I could embrace it in this weird fetishistic kind of way, and I recently was writing a paper on foodies, and I did a little research online on foodie culture. And there's an aspect of foodie culture that embraces the kind of Elvira horror. It's a sexual, fetishistic, weird, right? So there is this other response, right? As Tim points out in the book, is the system is presenting this to you and saying, this is the structure, this is what people are doing, and it's like it's kind of like an anti thing to go. I love it, I embrace it, it's ghoulish, I'm ghoulish, and so that's one of the dangers that I've been thinking about with regard to these images. So I was just wondering how that might fit into, rather than having two responses, maybe having a third of celebration, or as he says, participation.
Yeah, I mean, I think there will be, I mean, again, I'm very empirical, so, and there's also, well, I have two things to say. You could test that, right? You could do a pre and post test. You could see people's attitudes before they see these images and see if they celebrate this kind of violence more after they see them. So I can't answer that question, but I can imagine it's possible. But there's also the idea of bearing witness too, which says that you become entrenched, pulled in, and sort of fascinated with these images, but it's not for your own pleasure, it's to bear witness, so someone's lived reality matters. So I think, again, I think that these are like questions that I'm not smart enough or moral enough or ethical enough to tease my way through, so I just test the arguments other people are having, and I think it all needs to be there, and that's interesting. And I didn't read that book closely, I think maybe I just read sections, but I'm definitely going to go back and look at that.
I think it's the last chapter.
That's probably why. Can I ask Mitch a question? Or a statement? Mitch, can you hear me? Yeah, is he clicking? Well, I guess I want to, it's like more of a statement, but I guess you probably worked through it, so maybe you could talk more about it. But, so, you know I worked with human torture survivors for a while, right?
Right.
And so one of the things that really struck me was I had always had this sort of, there's two things that were interesting. One was I'd always had a belief that people thought that animals weren't like humans, and so that was how they could torture animals. But then it was this very jarring, shocking moment when I realized people did this to people, and it kind of broke me. So I'm wondering if like these findings were shocking to you. And then the second thing I'll say, just out of interest, is the way they trained me to prepare me to hear about torture was they gave me the government's manual on how not to torture people, because it's so, their public documentation so explicitly outlined how to torture people but the right things not to say so you can't be brought up on torture charges, that it was like a manual to torture. So I found that fascinating, but I wondered if you were like surprised by these things, or if you kind of, when you went into this research, you knew what was going on.
Well, we had some internal discussions at PETA about, I mean, we had obviously known in the organization about Slightman. He had actually, his company, he does these bizarre positivity trainings for companies and workforces to improve morale. He had actually sent a mailing to PETA, his company, probably inadvertently advertising his services to improve morale at the organization. So this was on our mind. And so we didn't really, as an organization, read too much into what was actually coming out from the Senate report. I think that obviously I haven't read the redacted public version. I think that it's going to be something that, you know, I probably understand the tip of the iceberg doing research into this, and it's something that we're going to understand more and more as time goes on, and more as we learn about the vacuum and repercussions that we created through this war. You know, last week, Blackwater contractors got sentenced to prison, and different countries whose citizens were tortured in these black sites are still investigating. They're trying to subpoena torturers and people identified as torturers. The detainee in Guantanamo said that his torturer was being used in the trial as an interpreter. So I think that revelations are continuing to come out, and that, but in the same way that Elaine's theory says that it's difficult to make intelligible torture, because pain, really, we don't have a way to really express torture in its total embodiment, I guess I would say. So it's difficult to understand what torture actually means for the person. It's difficult to understand what an animal is experiencing in experimentation. And so in my paper, it's easier to understand the overarching structures, but the individual is difficult to grapple with.
Thank you. We have, there's 4 minutes, so depending on the question, we have time for 1 or 2 more. Just want to make sure anyone else before Rob.
I had a question for Ping Sue. I'm curious about, just in general, because I don't know much about the animal movement in Taiwan, but so can you just talk a little bit about, like, if I was in Taiwan and I said I'm a vegan, what's the attitude with regard to, say, veganism or animal rights? Is it something that's in the culture as it is here, or so can you give like a general sketch of what the attitude in the culture is regarding vegans and animal rights and stuff?
In my country, we hear vegan, we will connect to the religion more quickly. Religion? Yeah, religion. Yeah, but in here, probably about the animal rights, right? Yeah. So it's very different. Yeah.
So in the photos from the 2013 election, I noticed that it looks like everyone has their faces aren't covered, so it's open, and it seems like that's an immensely powerful thing. Has like the climate changed since that happened in Brazil, or was it kind of like a one-time thing?
Right, that was a one-time thing. As I said, that was unplanned. They did not plan to have the rescue of the beagles. And it just got out of control, and the people were arriving, and the activists, of course, they did not plan to invade. The media said that they did, but they did not. They were actually fighting against the Institute for a year. But it was the right moment. And again, when their calls hit the social media, and then people started seeing the pictures and the images, and the institute administrator's card, they were going to remove the animals, so people decided they were going to go there. And that's how it happened.
How many people were there?
I don't have that number.
It was a lot.
That's a lot.
So,
I think we have maybe one more question.
For me too. I lived in Taiwan for many years. And as a foreigner, there was very little politically that we were permitted to do. If we were found to be influencing political action, we would have our papers would be canceled, and we would have to leave. And so I'm wondering, do you plan on going back to Taiwan and influencing it? Because education seems to be a big problem. That spaying and neutering is not common, the dumping of animals that you talked about, and the fact that no one that I knew went to a shelter, besides foreigners, went to a shelter to get animals, to adopt a dog. It was always by purchase. So do you have any plans to take the research and apply it back in Taiwan?
So far, do we move back to Taiwan?
Yeah, I'm wondering, do you see an application of like what you've been working on, bringing it back? Yeah.
I think I would say right now I'm open to any opportunity, but my career goal, my personal career goal will to develop some program related to forces equal.
Okay.
So I don't know the future because 5 years ago, I have totally different career goal. But right now I'm going to different areas, so yeah, it's very hard for me to tell. Yeah.
And not many horses in Taiwan to work with, so.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll wrap up. Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mitch. We're gonna say goodbye to you now.
I have my personal email that I never
In the front by the.
Two numbers.
So these aren't really.
How do we rate this in terms of like ranking them with
This
respect
means
to?
that. Associate's degree, 8.5 times more likely than this, less likely to slide up 1 point in that scale.
Okay.
So it's a huge, it looks like a huge effect size, but it's actually not because of just the number of people who are in this group.
Right.
So these are easier to read, so I put them on there. This is what makes it more sense, and honestly, what matters most is if you see it positive. And this is the right thing.
Oh, okay.
So it's like, if we just don't make any special education, is the effective education overall significant or not? And then these are two different ways to, psychologists like this, who look at the psychologists, so we threw that on their chair, and sociologists like this. So,
You know the other interesting.
so like the education effect is kind of washed out, because we like to see this at like 0.05 or lower. And so it's like bordering because of not how many, there's information in this equation, application. So this is not a very strong, significant thing.
Right.
Age is not significant at all, but we have to theoretically it's super important. And everything else is like, clearly significant.
Would it be cool to see income, to see if that made any difference?
Income, so it didn't.
Oh, see.
Wait, did we put it on there? I'm trying to remember. So income is a really challenging question on the surveys because people are most likely to drop out and put in survey question.
Oh.
They want to be So yes, when you construct a survey, you have to pick the most sensitive information last because people are more likely to drop out, and that is the #1 demographic question in which people click. And so almost always in research, you use a proxy of education. I'm trying to remember our surveys. I actually conducted the experiment like 2 years ago, and I just wasn't getting on it, so I brought it here to finish up the job. I had like one model done, and I was just like, I had some personal things, and we moved 10 times in 10 years, so I just wasn't getting it done. So honestly, I cannot remember what I put income on the survey. But if you were really interested in it, you want to email me after about the effects of it.
Yeah, I was just curious. As a personal anecdote, I teach genetics class at Brooklyn College, and I showed Earthlings to my class as a companion video to Provide Singer. And then at the end of Earthlings, which is we've all seen this fucking gruesome video.
Yeah.
At the end of Earthlings, I asked my students to vote anonymously as to whether they think they thought it was. I had 40 students, but they thought it was a productive companion piece. Consider our order as your paper, as the text. And 97% of them said that it was. In fact, it was really surprised the hell out of me.
Earthlings is that one video that makes people people go vegan, but like the thing to keep in mind with that, which is something you can't test, that's like something you know for your life experience, is that there's different images, there's different visuals, there's voiceover, there's like undercover footage, there's like, there's haunting. Well, and there's like images that I still have nightmares about 8 years later. So like, those images are so special.
Right.
But that's really
But
interesting.
in that case, the gruesome, I was surprised it was 97%. I was expecting it to be maybe 50, 40, 30,
Really?
20.
But it's like 80% of people you know who are vegan were like, oh.
Yeah, that's true.
But that doesn't mean that 80% of the people who see her can still vegan.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm glad you did that evaluated record. Like,
Oh, yeah,
like,
because what I did is I told them too that if something like 60% of them, I forget exactly what it was, said it wasn't, an infected companion piece, I never showed again. But if it did, I would show it again next semester. So it was also about like showing children to other students, so maybe that might have helped.
no, because then they're more invested in the camera.
That's what I thought, so yeah, so almost all of them thought that people could see next semester too.
I've been teaching animal rights for 10 years, and I do like singer, I do all the theory and philosophy class, and then I'll show something like nature or something like that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have people come and say, I took your class 3 years ago, and I'm still vegetarian, I'm vegan, because of that video. They never say because of those great arguments. It's like, all I need to do is show that video if I want people to become vegan. All the argumentation doesn't seem to do it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it seems like, I mean, studies of like watching those pay-per-view videos show that people want to become vegetarian. I don't follow up, but
Yeah.
information. Interestingly, I taught a class in the environment where I did not, they have sexual animals, but I don't represent my ideology, but they were allowed to do papers on childbearing and on vegetarianism as possible topics related to the environment, and everyone that chose one of those came up to me and was like, I'm no longer sure if I want to have kids, or they did vegetarian, like, I'm vegetarian.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't know what they saw, but there's something about like,
You're doing good work. Preventing population growth and causing bigger vegetarians. Two good things.
Makes dating hard though, I'll tell you, lady in my 30s.
I really want to see where your research goes in the future too, so.
On this?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really awesome.
It might be a one-off.
Oh, yeah, that's too bad.
Because I do mostly, yeah, no, if I ever got funding, I'm like, it's just my agenda right now is, not, I mean, this was like, I love to empirically test stuff, so I've also empirically tested debates about the effects of radicalism and how newspapers cover it. But often, I'm going and, it's awful with tenure diversity, right? I'm trying to have like a more streamlined, so instead of consistently testing like the current debate in the social movement, I'm just like, I mean, I'm working on important issues in conjunction with nonprofits. I always try to bring a nonprofit and scholars who aren't, you know, but I've been starting to do work on like sexual abuse of animals because I have a great nonprofit partner. So I feel like that's where I'm going for the next many years, but we have so much data just from this that we want to get it all out the door. But it's challenging because I have to wait till summer to work on it. And then
It sounds expensive too.
pulling the samples, yeah, I have to like, but if I do go to a conference for a year, I can use professional development funds. If I somehow, my stupid ass teaching, but not that I don't like teaching, it's just huge at my school or teaching is astronomical. Yeah. It's like, oh my God, right? And I teach project-based learning, so we're like, I have to have community partners and actually train them to kind of, you know, right, you both know it's a
Are you go, I just want to ask, are you going back?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, I'll just text you, I'm just going to sit on the final session.
Okay, I have like a slew of students getting
And I'll
very
just do
quickly
it.
more, so, okay. Yeah, so I just, it's like, I like when maybe I'll apply for a grant to do, because I really want to do pro-life videos too. And one of my co-authors on this paper was not comfortable with that because of some work he does with women. He didn't want them to look up his name and think he was associated with being a pro-life activist. But I think that they use the same images and they face the same oppression and they have the same debates. And I would love to do a human rights campaign,
Yeah.
like when people look like you, like what's the effect? So yeah, I would love for it to go somewhere. Anyone who's interested in pushing it along with me, let me know, because I can always nudge and support.
Well, I have tons of time with my schedule.
Yeah.
Are you a professor or a student?
Student.
And you're teaching?
Yeah.
Animal studies? That's
At the
amazing.
State University of New York, they have undergrads that teaching clothes and as well as coursework and education. So
Not even TAs, like a teaching load.
yeah.
That's amazing.
I have taken this semester and it's crazy.
That is crazy, but it'll help you on the job market.
Oh, and I love doing it, so I get to show these students things every semester. So
It's really amazing to let you teach that class.
it was really hard at first to get up the guts to do it, and I had one of my students who was like 18 years old. She was just do it.
That's amazing. What's your name? Adam. Thanks for your feedback on that.
Yeah. Really recharged. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm writing it up right now, so I need more feedback. It's like clearly not the visuals, not my house. I like numbers.
Good. Okay. See you later.
Bye, guys.
Yeah.
I'm sharing now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I wanted to do some. Yeah. I'm Shannon. Okay, Shannon. So did you want to go first? Yeah.
It's another journal.
No, yeah. I don't mind. I haven't been in here yet. So, are all of our panelists here? No matter what, you're here. Is Laura here? So, kind of behind the timing thing, right? Or are we already? Let's start. Laura, what they look like. Okay. Okay. So, well, I guess we're still on time. We're only 1:42. Another clock, I'm sure.
Right. Want to fire the larkers for a second?
Yeah.
Live action role play.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, for what?
Like they pretend like they're knights and stuff like that. And they fight with artifacts.
Oh,
There's like
yeah.
3 different squads.
oh, there's a
And
fairy.
they're throwing spells and all sorts of stuff.
Oh, here.
It's a big subculture now. Yeah.
That's pretty interesting. Benjamin.
Benjamin, okay. I went to this one, and this one was interesting. They all had really interesting theory, like application of it, I thought. It just wasn't like, I thought it just been totally too. This one was interesting. Yeah, she was around she was looking years old. I was like, she was older. I'm not sure if they left it running or I'm not really sure.
It's on.